Okay, let's move on to welfare. Is the government right to be cutting the welfare budget?
Well, I think that the welfare budget does need to come down, but I think the way that you do that is you get people into work. And actually, if you look at what's going on at the moment, the welfare bill is not going down, it's going through the roof. Because the government has failed on work and it's failed on jobs, we've got welfare spending in Britain now going up £24 billion. Now, to balance the books, what the government is doing is actually hitting working people harder than anybody else. So £14 billion is now coming out of tax credits over the course of this Parliament. Now, if you're a part-time worker, that means that you're now better off on benefits than you are in work. And if you're actually in work and you're working full-time, you're more likely to be working in poverty. Now, I think that kind of short-changing of the strivers is the result of one basic failure, the failure to get Britain back to work.
But the inherited welfare spending from your government of about 125 billion, I'm including tax credits, but excluding pensions. From welfare, because people don't really regard pensions as welfare. They've contributed largely to it. They're in the process at the moment of reducing that bill, trying to, by about £18 billion. Now, is that about right, regardless of whether they're successful or not? Is that about the right amount of money they should be trying to take off welfare?
No, I don't accept those numbers, because if you look at what is happening to the welfare bill overall, it's going up by £24 billion for a very simple reason. There has been a failure to get the country back to work.
All right. Let's take that. Let's assume that that's right. But what is also right is that they inherited a welfare budget of 125 billion in 2010. That was the size of it that you left behind. What would you have done to that 125 billion? How would you have cut it? Would you have cut it? By how much and how?
Well, I've said very clearly that I think the welfare bill needs to come down. But look, the way Labour gets welfare bills down is it gets Britain back into jobs. Now, look at what's happened over the last couple of years. Plan A has failed. We're in the longest double-dip recession since the war. Governor of the Bank of England says the economy may shrink again. And crucially, the government's big work programme, about which so much was promised, is now in complete gridlock. Referrals to the programme have halved over the last year, and the number of long-term unemployed, the very people it was supposed to help, has gone up by 200,000 over the last year. That doesn't tell me it's a programme that's working. It's a programme that's failing, and the cost is a rising welfare bill that the government is balancing by cutting people's tax credits.
Well, you say Labour got welfare down by getting people back into jobs. Let me just remind you what happened under Labour. If we look at this chart, you inherited a welfare budget, including the state pension, of 83 billion in 97 and 98. When you came into power. By the time you left power, after all that economic growth and all the jobs you were supposed to create, it was up to 125 billion. You let welfare rise even when the economy was growing.
No, but think about what those numbers include. Those numbers include, for example, about £25 billion worth of tax credits. Those numbers include, for example, absolutely. Those numbers include, for example, extra help with childcare. Now, this reflects the fact that many people do now rely on tax credits in order to balance the books at the end of the month.
But you increased welfare. Even in a growing economy, when jobs were being created, you increased welfare spending.
We made sure that there was extra help going to working families to make sure that work paid better than benefits. Now, look, Andrew, at what's going on now. The cuts to tax credits are so severe that a part-time worker is £700 a year better off on benefits than in work. That can't be right. And if you're a working couple, there are now 6 million of you working but living in poverty because tax credits are being cut so badly. So I'm afraid the government is taking it out. They're shortchanging Britain's strivers because of this basic ability, this basic failure to get Britain back to work.
But I just wonder where your credibility stands when you look at the promises that you made before. This is what Mr. Blair said. He used to talk about all this welfare bill being the price of social failure. He said, I vow that we will have reduced the proportion of our national income that we spend on the welfare bills of social failure. And you failed to do that. You did not. You increased it.
But sure, but the figures
that was a broken promise.
But the figures you're judging are figures taken at the height of the recession, at a time with the worst crash since the 1920s.
Well, Joe, I can give you the figures. I can give you the figures before the crash too, if you want. But figures before the no, you've raised it. Yep. I take your point. Unemployment rose after the crash. I understand that. So let's take the figure for 2007-8 before the crash. 106 billion versus the 83 billion you inherited. So even after 10 years of booming Britain, You had still increased welfare.
And now ask yourself, how much of that extra help, how much of that rising spend is actually tax credits and support for childcare? Things that are crucial in helping make sure that people are better off in work, and crucial to helping make sure that many people, particularly working women, can actually go back out to get jobs.
All right. But that, you promised you would cut welfare, and you didn't.
No, we made sure that there was extra help on the table for working families. That is the right thing to do. What's going wrong now is the welfare bill is rising because of the failure to get Britain back to work. What the government is doing is now taking it out on Britain's drivers.
Well, the latest figures I have for the welfare
bill
is that it's not rising. It's not being cut by anything like the amount. The latest welfare figures I show is that it's a little under what they inherited in 2010.
Well, Office of Budget Responsibility is pretty clear about it. The welfare bill is set to rise by 24 billion over the course of Parliament.
I know. It's less now than it was in 2010.
No, the welfare bill over the course of this Parliament is set to rise by over £24 billion, and I suspect George Osborne will have to revise up that budget again, well, because he's failed to get Britain back to work,
yes,
because his economic plan has failed, and because the work programme at the DWP is in complete gridlock.